само овој настан, туку на 27 април и на 5 мај ќе можете да следите уште две вакви панел дискусии, едната за зелено закрепнување, а другата за отпорност на екстремни климатски промени. За сите подетални информации поврзани со настанот, панелистите и присутните, следете ја фан страната Климатски промени на Facebook, каде се споделуваат сите новости поврзани со овој настан. Почитувани гледачи и присутни во студиото, панелистите на настанот возможно е ќе зборуваат за националните придонеси за климатските промени, глобалната визија за климатската акција и ќе се фокусираат врз целите и плановите на национално ниво. Време е да започнеме. Денеска ќе се обратат господинот Насер Нуредини, министер за животна, средина и просторно планирање, господја Нарине Сахакјан, постојан представник на UNDP, и господинот Фатмир Бесими, кој што е министер за финансии. Ке презентираме неколку видеа од господјата Патриша Еспиноза, извршен секретар на Рамковната конвенција на Обединетите нации за климатски промени. А бидејќи во последно време веќе не се зборува за климатски промени, повеќе се зборува за климатска криза. Која е улогата на националните придонеси за климатските промени во неизино надминување и дали се доволни амбициозни цели, ќе видиме во официјалното видео на Рамковната конвенција на Обединетите нации за климатски промени. Амбиција на државите да се постигне глобалната цел за климатските промени од 1,5 целзиусови степени. Денеска ќе ни каже и ќе ни се обрати извршниот секретар на Рамковната конвенција на Обединетите нации за климатски промени, Патриция Еспиноза.
Clear that current levels of climate ambition do not put us onto a pathway towards our Paris Agreement goals. And so we urge all parties, especially major emitters, to look at how, in the coming months, they can increase their ambition and reflect this in new or revised NDCs. We simply cannot afford further delay or our current pathway. The circular economy plays a definite role here. It must expand if we are to reduce emissions across sectors, as it is an essential component to achieving climate neutrality. It is clear that current levels of climate ambition do not put us onto a pathway towards meeting our Paris Agreement goals. And so we urge all parties, especially major emitters, to look at how, in the coming months, they can increase their ambition and reflect this in new or revised NDCs. We simply cannot afford further delay or our current pathway. The circular economy plays a definite role here. It must expand if we are to reduce emissions across sectors, as it is an essential component to achieving climate neutrality. It is clear that current levels of climate ambition do not put us onto a path.
Токму така, возможно е, или официјалниот...
Exactly, it is possible to achieve the set goal with real discussions, proposed solutions, and ambitious actions. It is time to start with the questions to our panelists, who, unfortunately, due to the pandemics, will not be all present at the studio, but we will have another opportunity in future to organize such an event and ask them the questions live. The first question is to Mr. Nasser Nureddini, Minister of Environment and Physical Planning. We asked him if our country is ambitious enough with respect to the set goal on climate change as adopted by the government last week. Here's the reply.
Yes, I believe we're actually quite ambitious. If you actually look at our nationally determined contribution to climate change in regards to the Paris Agreement, we have given a very ambitious proposal of a reduction of 51% in greenhouse gas emissions in comparison to 1990, which is approximately a reduction of 82% in net value. This is a very ambitious target, and we believe we're actually one of the leaders in the region when it comes to this target. But it's not just a target, it's actually something we've planned, we worked around. We've included a different kind of experts, may it be from MANU, may it be from the internationals. The UNDP has helped us in this progress, and we are being ambitious because we're looking at the renewable energy sources, we're looking at energy efficiency, we're looking at the whole change of the consumer practices. This is why it is not only important that we set an ambitious target as a government, hence it is also very important that all these sectors work together. And right now, the Ministry of Environment, of course, is a member of the Economic Commission of the government. And we have a very good collaboration together with the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Economy. Because these two institutions, or these three institutions together, can actually make that change, considering the Ministry of Economy is working on the energy strategy, the Ministry of Transport is working on our infrastructure and the mobility. However, though, the fourth integral part in this working group is the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance and the current Minister of Finance is fully supporting the strategy of green growth, of sustainable development. Because the values we're looking at when it comes to achieving these targets we've set are quite high. However, this doesn't mean it's not possible. The idea is to have the government itself invest in sustainable growth, invest in lower greenhouse gas emissions, move away from coal-fired power plants, generating our energy in the country, and most importantly, work together to motivate our consumers, our citizens, to buy more environmentally friendly products and to make their houses more energy efficient. He's very supportive, which we are very grateful for, and he sees the potential of a very good economic growth through green, sustainable investments.
Едно од најважните прашања кои што исто така
One of the important questions to Ms. Nureddini is related to our integration to the European Union, that is how the national contributions support the cause of our government.
We need to all be very well aware that in order to become a member of the EU family, we're going to have to align ourselves to the EU policies. Hence, of course, our strategy is being aligned to the EU directives, the EU acquis. We're harmonizing our laws. However, though, we have to be very well aware of the fact that the European Green Deal is where we're all heading towards. Hence, we're also actually very grateful that there's actually for the Western Balkan Green Agenda, which is helping countries like ours who, of course, have not achieved the standards yet of the European Union to have a transition phase before we can achieve that, we can actually reach the European Green Deal level. Of course, we're looking at promoting and supporting the consumers, the private sectors, of course, the central government and the local self-government to move away from using fossil fuels. We're looking at the same to achieve the similar targets by 2050, to actually have a zero emission plan in place. Of course, we're not the same level as the European Union country members, but we're hopefully going to be aligning ourselves in the next few years to get there. Again, this is not something that we're looking at a mandate of today and tomorrow. We need to be thinking about the long-term strategies. Hence, the EU Green Deal is fully helping us align ourselves to it. We are committed as a government, when we shouldn't only be committed as a government here, we should be committed as a country, because this is not something that's going to be achievable in the next few years. This is something we need to be planning for the next 30 years. Hence, everybody needs to be on board here to help us as a country align to the EU. At the same time, though, I would also like to pinpoint one thing. We are actually a smaller country where we have similar obligations to the larger countries. And here we will need the support of the larger countries, especially the EU, to fulfill these requirements.
Благодарност до министерот за животна средина.
Many thanks to the Minister of Environment and Physical Planning, who found time and way to answer our questions. We also posed questions to the Minister of Finance, Mr. Fatmir Besimi. One of the questions was whether NDCs were an additional burden for the budget, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Here is his answer. We, as a government, are committed to green growth and everything it implies. In that context, investments, which mean improvements in the environment, and the NDCs are something that we are committed to. During today, today, we signed an agreement with the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, and the City of Skopje administration for the rapid bus transport system, which is intended to improve the air quality in Skopje, the environment in general, and will also sign a 25 million euro worth contract with the World Bank for better energy efficiency in public institutions. In our public investment portfolio, there are a number of environmental projects related to energy efficiency, also the photovoltaic systems. The thermal power plants in Oslo-May and Bitola will also be addressed. The interconnection with the gas supply system at national level. So there are a few projects in this regard, and we will also mention here the plan for financing green growth in the forthcoming period. It will be presented in due time. It includes a environmental component, of course. In the taxation system, there will be a carbon tax. In consultations with the business community and with other stakeholders, including the civil society, will define the most appropriate solutions in that regard as well. Since the Minister of Finance is always asked about finance, we had to ask Mr. Besimi about the financial framework for the implementation of the NDCs. Regarding the financial framework for the NDCs, according to the current estimates, we have about 7.7% of the GDP, and over a multi-annual framework, it will be implemented. In order to achieve that, when it comes to public infrastructure project, part of that will be financed from the budget, part of it with loans, but private initiative and private investments are also very much welcome. We think that this will be a joint effort based on well-defined policies in order to improve the environmental situation in general, and in particular to have the NDCs implemented with the 51% reduction of GHG emissions as a target. Since we said that this event is happening in cooperation with the Ministry of Environment and Physical Planning and UNDP, we asked Mrs. Narina Sahakyan, as resident representative of UNDP here, why UNDP came up with this climate promise in general and especially in our country. Here is the answer.
Of North Macedonia and to Minister Nureddini for adoption of the enhanced NDCs, ambitious but also realistic target to meet. I'm particularly mentioning being realistic because it's backed by good data and analytics, as well as in line with all national relevant policies. I hope you will all agree with me that it is not enough to encourage countries to raise their ambitions, but we need also to consider how they are going to do that. What are the support they will need and how we development partners can help them to achieve their goals, considering different circumstances, different resources and ambitions. Climate Promise is UNDP's commitment to ensure that any country wishing to increase the ambition of their national climate pledge is able to do so. It is the world's biggest global offer on NDC enforcement and enhancement, currently supporting 180 countries in collaboration with 35 partners. Through the Climate Promise, UNDP works by the side of countries in their aiming high and acting on their climate responsibilities. Our promise support draws upon UNDP's intensive portfolio of expertise across the priorities such as energy, forest, water, agriculture, health, youth, finance, governance, gender equality, and of course, green jobs. It is also built on UNDP's established track record in supporting governments to discuss, to design and deliver climate action under the Paris Agreement. As a main supporter and partner of the Macedonian government, when it comes to the climate smart policy and strategy development, UNDP country office stepped up with the Climate Promise initiative. We work together a step-by-step process with the Ministry of Environment and Physical Planning and with other relevant stakeholders to identify Macedonian best option for enhancing its climate action. The results are impressive and as much as ambitious, showcasing that knowledge is the main trigger for climate action.
Навистина убави зборови чувме од господјата Сахакјан, но со самите нејзини одговори се протнува и...
We really heard some nice words from Mrs. Sahakyan, and now we have a question for the Minister of Environment and Physical Planning, because he's the leader of a state institution, of a ministry responsible for this area. We asked him if our citizens were well familiar with the seriousness of climate change. Here's his answer.
Response to that, I think our citizens are very aware. However, we also have statistical backing to actually say that. Over the last few years, we've held different surveys to see and understand how serious our citizens take the topic of climate change. And what we've realized that the younger generations are a lot more aware of it and take it more seriously. We also need to work on making the rest of the citizens aware of the issues, because this is affecting our daily lives. This is not something that we can just call climate change. We understand climate change is a very global issue. However, the more aware our citizens are, the more they will demand of us as governments, of any government, to take action. The more we actually take action, hence why our ambitious NDC of reducing 51% has also stood up and stood out, which I am very glad to say for the first time we've been invited by the Special Envoy to Climate Change of President Biden to a roundtable discussion with Mr. Kerry. So the more the citizens are aware, the more actions we as the government need to take. The reason why I'm saying we need the voice of the citizens because it drives the change as well. Hence, the ones that are not aware, we need to work more on awareness, making them more aware. The reason why I say this is because the work that we're doing already and the work we still have in front of us is actually very important to be understood by the citizens so they accept it. When we speak about flood flood-resistant projects, this is also linked to climate change. This will affect our daily livelihoods. If we're speaking about agriculture, if we're speaking about circular economy on waste management, which also has an impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Hence why we're also, as a country, of course, as a government, sorry, we're going to try and be very clear and transparent about all the new laws we're trying to pass. For example, the 6 laws we are currently passing on waste management. This will not only help us keep our environment clean, at the same time, though, this will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And these kind of topics and other laws to follow on nature protection, on environment, these will need to be discussed with our citizens, and this will hopefully further raise the awareness of our citizens. And as I said, we are seeing this as a global issue, and I think we have seen even the youth globally called the Friday movement, and I think we should also support it here, because when we're speaking about climate change, it will not impact our lives today. However, it will impact our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives tomorrow. Hence why I think it is of utmost importance that the youth is aware, that the youth is making a point about climate change, because they are actually voicing their opinion and their awareness and their concern for their own future. And we, any government member across the world, needs to listen to the youth and also explain this to anyone else who is not aware of the impact this will have on their livelihood tomorrow.
Благодарам за одговорот, а ние оваа прва сесија ќе ја продолжиме со уште едно прашање до господјата.
Another question to Mrs. Narina Sakakyan, and the question is how NDCs are connected with the other global United Nations goals.
A challenging year for governments who have been struggling to contain the spread of the virus while also managing the impact of economic fallouts and ensuring continuation of service provision for most vulnerable people. At the same time, the climate actions has not gone away. In fact, all existing challenges have been magnified by the pandemic. At the same time, the pandemic also created opportunities, and we need to remember about that. With the right choices, governments can address all of these crises at once by making the transition to low-carbon, green, and resilient economies. By identifying the synergies and trade-offs between the climate action and the broader development needs, policymakers can enhance the positive impact of recovery packages and lead to systemic changes in societies. Macedonian NDC shows how to spur economic growth and job creation while aligning with national development strategies and objectives, EU accession policies, and the SDGs. Country recently initiated the development of the new long-term national development strategy to provide an all of the society vision on the future of the country. And enhanced NDCs should be one of the key documents informing the new strategy, as well as the reform agenda of EU acceleration and accelerating the country's EU acceleration path. When it comes to the SDGs, the strongest synergy remains with the SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, due to the new job opportunities in renewable energy deployment and in the construction and retrofit market. It also, related to the sustained economic growth, improved economic efficiency per unit of product, and sustained support to entrepreneurship. By the end of June this year, the enhanced NDCs shall be accompanied with the financing strategy that will translate national climate pledges into a very concrete action plan. Moreover, the concrete recommendations for de-risking of renewables and energy efficiency will follow as energy is the sector that has the highest potential for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Last but not least, to keep climate action ambitions on track while informing future target setting, a national system for continuous and transparent monitoring and reporting on climate sector shall be established. Let me reiterate what I mentioned in the beginning when I was answering the first question. A national and local collaboration around NDCs is required to help the country to meet emission reduction goals. And UNDP stands ready to continue supporting with joint advocacy and knowledge sharing, leveraging the NDC's partnership and UNDP's long-standing networks.
Moram da počekam.
I have to wait a few seconds for the interpretation to finish. I hope you can hear everything well and you can absorb the messages that we're sending today through the videos presented. There is another video with which we will finish this part. This is the video of Mrs. Espinosa, who will tell us whose voices are the loudest in climate change.
Your voices truly matter. These discussions, these solutions, they truly matter. It may not always feel that way, given all the big issues we're facing this year. And I know you've been ignored for too long. But I assure you, I hear you, I respect you, I value you, and I thank you. This goes for all of us at UN Climate Change. We are here to provide whatever support you may need. I wish you the best of luck with these discussions, and I will see you on the road to COP26. Thank you. I have a final...
На младите светот останува, па затоа е важно сите да се вклучиме во борбата.
The world is left to the youth, and therefore it is very important for everyone to get involved in the fight and achieve the cause. In today's discussion, we will hear the message of all the panelists today. They have sent a joint message to all the citizens in the country. It is possible. We have national goals for reducing the effects from the climate change.
Climate change by acting together and ensuring effective and well-coordinated cooperation with all stakeholders, locally, nationally, and internationally.
Është e mundur ta mbrojmë dhe ta dorëzojmë planetën në gjeneratat e ardhshme.
Дефинитивно сум убеден дека возможно е.
I'm definitively convinced that it is possible. Thank you for the replies, the sincerity, and for being part of this first part on the first event, on the first day of this event on climate change and its effects. In the second part of our panel discussion, experts from different areas will reply questions related to the enhanced national determined contribution related to energy and other sectors such as industrial processes, waste, agriculture, stock breeding, etc. The person for contact on the convention, UNFCCC convention, Ms. Teodora Bradovic-Charovska, is here with us today. Because of the epidemics, we will not shake hands. Natasha Markovska, scientific advisor at MANU, Alexander Dedinets from the Macedonian Academy of Science and Art, who will be online due to the protocols, and Professor Ordan Chukaliev, who is from the Faculty of Agricultural Sciences and Food. In the next 30 minutes, our speakers, our panelists, will have an opportunity to present to us some key aspects and practices in the area of climate change, and to provide the expert opinion of on the dealing of the country with the climate change. We are opening the discussion with Ms. Teodora Obradovic-Grančarovska, representative of the UNFCCC. This is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Ms. Grančarovska, how did the Ministry of Environment and Physical Planning led the process of preparing the national determined contributions? Thank you for the question, and thank you for organizing this very interesting event on the promotion of the last adopted NDC. The NDC is a product of several years of work on developing and adopting previous documents. So the Paris Agreement in Article 4 refers to the fact that countries should enhance their NDCs in line with the latest scientific research and achievements. We based our work on this, so the results and the robust analysis done on the goals set in the third biennial updated report on climate change and the national strategy on energy development. We use this information as input information and as processes in order to arrive at the most feasible solution about the obligation of the country and contribution of the country to the global Paris goal, which is not to allow the global temperature to rise for more than 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And thus, we have put at disposal all national capacity with the support of the international community and the national expertise. And we have undergone an international process of audit of the data. So everything in terms of data proposed to the government is real data, is something that can be done. It is not purely theoretical work. It is a great product, a match between the science and the decision-making. So let me go back to the question. As I said, the entire available capacity was engaged. In terms of institutions in the government, ministries, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Transport, the Cabinet of the Vice Prime Minister, etc., so as to coordinate all proposed activities in other documents as well. So everything to be coordinated within the framework of the joint climate action. So this is not an isolated document. It integrates all the documents and provides recommendations where this action should be further integrated in the other documents. So this action is the base for the integrated plan on energy and climate prepared by the Ministry of Economy and for the development of the program of the energy strategy. This means that the green scenario is translated in concrete action measures. Let's not forget the other stakeholders. We are not talking only about academic activity or an activity at the level of ministries or the state only. On the contrary, as previously, we put an effort to make the process transparent and inclusive so that all local action is translated or incorporated into our analysis. So we were supported by the NGO sector, the local self-government, other formal and non-formal groups, and now we can jointly see the results. We have succeeded. An important thing I would like to know is you mentioned the NGO sector, the other institutions. What was the reaction of all the involved parties? How did they react? Did they see this as a really important topic to discuss and act on? Yes, this is a valid question. as someone who's been working for 20 years on this topic, I can say yes, the response is more and more positive. Our ministry was the one to initiate in the phase of developing the project on energy development to include the decarbonization component, thus following the 5 components of the European Union regulation, and that is the integrated governance regulation for energy and climate. So this is the role of our ministry. We have our internal work, but very important is also our task to intervene with other stakeholders when documents are developed and when documents are implemented in the phases that follow. If if our work intersects with theirs, there shouldn't be a collision. For example, with respect to energy development, there shouldn't be a collision with the climate action. This is the very important moment that makes possible the implementation of the obligations from the Paris Agreement. The decarbonization became an equally important component as the energy supply component or the free energy market component. This is a contribution of the energy specialists and deserves attention and deserves to be praised. We succeeded in integrating the policies for protection of the environment and less climate change with the economic growth and development. Europe proved that these components are not opposed but compatible, and they can be developed in line with the economic and environment growth. The NDC was proposed by the Ministry of Environment. The national goal in 2030 is to achieve 51% reduction of greenhouse gases. As directly involved in the process, I would like to ask you about the enhanced NDC, what it covers, and how it complies with the national development strategy. The 51% reduction of the emissions is the main element compared to the emissions in 1990. All aspects will be elaborated compared to our contribution in 2015, NDC 2015, when the Paris Agreement came into force. The integrated NDC has a higher ambition in absolute values. The difference between the business as usual scenario and the contribution scenario was about 5 megatons. But in 2030, the absolute difference would be 7.5 tons, which equals 50% of higher ambition, translated through the quantity of reduced greenhouse gases emissions. Is this a realistic ambition? Yes, it is. I will tell you why. The level of ambition is evident in the scope of the goal. If at that time we covered emissions mainly from the energy sector, energy transport and buildings, in this enhanced NDC, our goal encompasses the entire economy and addresses all the sectors, not just the energy as the main as the sector of concern. The scope of GHG also is important. At that time, the goal was to reduce the emissions of CO2 from fuel combustion. The enhanced NDC covers reduction of all three main gases: CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. With this was with respect to the level of ambition, but the enhanced NDC contains elements of improvement in other two directions. The first element pertains to the implementation of the NDC. And here we have 63 measures to be implemented. It is important that in addition to the sectoral measures, we have included enabling measures, measures that would make possible the reduction, would enable the reduction. The Minister of Finance mentioned one, and that is the carbon pricing. Another such enabling measure is the integration of the markets of electricity and gas, measures for improving the role of the private sector with discounts for the SMEs, and measures for the research and innovation and development that would overall enable the environment for a climate change action. Another aspect is that measures are elaborated in detail. It is listed who will implement them, where will finance come from, and concrete indicators with concrete values in the first and in the last year are listed, so that we could see the progress of the implementation and in order to provide transparency in the implementation of the measures. So at any moment in 2030, if we see that a measure is not being implemented or goals are not being achieved, we could be prepared to propose an action that would make this measure become possible. Another improvement aspect involved is the communication. The measures are elaborated in detail, but other activities are also prescribed, as well as the co-benefits in their interaction are also covered. So environment and economic assessment was done that helped with the prioritizing. Social aspects were addressed through the number of new jobs to be generated. If the measures of the NDC are implemented, then the social aspect is covered through including gender indicators and actions in every area in which of the measures in which this was possible. Also, consultations with youth are anticipated to hear the voice of the youth. This was done in the designing of the measures, but it is anticipated during the implementation so that youth would be motivated to be involved in the implementation of the measures. Analysis were made to quantify the role of these measures in the NDC on the implementation of the Sustainable Growth Agenda. This is something unique for our NDC compared to NDCs provided by other countries to present. Also, a lot of analysis were done to cover the practices of the circular economy so that they could be integrated in the reduction of the emissions of greenhouse gases. So all of these measures and actions serve to motivate everyone concerned to get involved in the implementation of the NDC. Now, to which extent the NDC is in line with the National Plan on Climate Change, I will not go into detail. Theodora gave a detailed account. These measures are an echo of the green scenario in the energy strategy. They are directly related to the work done at the moment, and that is the strategy on climate action and the law on climate action, which are being prepared at the moment. The draft national plan on climate and energy is reflected here, actually. The additional goals on the share of the renewable energy sources and energy efficiency are identically implemented, that is transferred into this NDC. So there is absolute connection and harmonization with the National Plan on Climate and Energy.
Since the MANU plays a very important role in different sectors related to climate change, we also invited online your colleague, the associate in MANU for environment, Mr. Alexander Dedinec, who is the representative of the team that worked on the scenarios for the enhanced NDCs. Alexander, thank you for being part of the It's Possible project. My question to you is, what are the key climate actions related to the energy sector? Thank you for the invitation for today's event. I hope you hear me well. Yes. I hope you hear him well. Yes. It is possible. And it is possible to hold a panel in this way, although I regret not being able to be there physically to speak about these very important developments in the area of energy efficiency and climate change. I've said it many times. I believe it's worth repeating it once again. We are a small country, a country without vast economic resources. However, we should not increase our dependency on imports of energy because it can negatively impact the financial markets. We, as a country, should focus on two important aspects. Energy efficiency, it's our most important energy resource, especially with regard to apartment buildings and other buildings, and renewable energy sources. These two are conducive to decarbonization and to fulfillment of the 51% reduction of GHG emissions target by 2031. When speaking about the most important measures in the energy sector, I would first and foremost highlight energy efficiency in all the sectors, in households, be it through efficient appliances like air conditioners and so on, and also renewable energy sources are very important. We also want to increase the share of solar panels. With that, we would like to meet the needs of about 350,000 households. Also, the windmills and wind parks. This requires investments in the flexibility of the electrical energy system. Therefore, we see a high potential in the construction of the Chebren hydropower plant, which must be implemented as a project. Then integration of markets, it's also very important for the renewable energy sources. Gasification is something we need for the industry, for the industrial sector, because in that way we can reduce the emissions of GHG in the industrial sector. So these are in general the policies in the energy sector, and I would add to that electrification of the transportation sector, and we should put bigger focus on the transportation sector because it's one of the biggest polluters and biggest emitters of GHG emissions, and we must find a way to reduce those emissions. Mr. Dedinec, since you mentioned GHG, and here we were talking in broader detail about how to solve the problem of climate change. In your opinion, how would you rate the openness of the government and the work of the government done in the field of reduction of GHG emissions? In the last 3 years, many things have changed in the energy sector. These things may not be very much visible for the citizens at first glance. However, they are conducive to decarbonization of the energy system in total in the country. The openness of the government for cooperation is obvious. Lately, we've had a great deal of communication with the government. All the documents that were mentioned about energy and climate change were developed. We discussed many issues, and this cooperation went at different levels, from the top, the ministers, all the way down to the first line operatives. Therefore, we are here today and speak about this very ambitious target. What the government did was to show that it had an interest in this, and they showed it by adopting the energy strategy in 2019. This strategy includes 3 scenarios, and the government opted for the green scenario, and with these enhanced NDCs we are striving at the green scenario. This is about the openness of the government. Yes, often we have different views with the government, on different aspects with the government, but that's helpful because sometimes we may not be able to see the whole picture, or vice versa, and this mutual consultations and interactions are very helpful. So government is very much open for cooperation, especially in the last 3 years, and I would like to say that all the documents that have been adopted, it's not the end of the story. That's just the first step. There is a long way for all of us to take, and on this journey we have to pay attention to the vulnerable groups, to the vulnerable categories, because they will be very much affected by this transition in the energy sector. Thank you so much. Now with Professor Ordan Chukaliev. When it comes to agriculture, it's mentioned from the aspect of adaptation and vulnerability. We all depend on agriculture, but we all have to be aware that agriculture, stock breeding are greenhouse gas emitters. Can you tell us a bit more about this? Yes, you're right to say that agriculture is maybe the most vulnerable sector, and worldwide it's the second biggest contributor to GHG emissions, and the same applies to the Republic of Macedonia. We are ranking second. It's a very high emitter. It only causes problem, not any advantage. In agriculture, although it's a natural process, there is nothing natural there. It changes the natural ecosystem into agro ecosystem. With the human input, with the energy input, we are creating a new ecosystem, and this ecosystem depends on human contribution, and that's why it's so vulnerable, so sensitive, not only to climate change, but also to many other changes. That's why it is so difficult to adapt, and once the ecosystem has been changed, it's normal that we are polluting. Among other things, there is GHG emissions. Where these emissions come from? Primarily from stock breeding. Stock breeding is the biggest emitter of methane on planet Earth. You know that in our food we use meat, dairy products, and that's why there is a huge number of bovine bred for meat, for milk, and they are the biggest contributors of methane. Methane can be obtained also from soils, like with rice production, or from swamps, or these wet areas. My point was that we all need to go vegan and then problem is solved. Well, not exactly. Now in the pipeline is the process of creation of artificial meat, but my point was that it's not only stock breeding that contributes to the generation of methane. In stock breeding, there is diazotanic oxide from poor management of manure. These are huge amounts of manure which is not properly managed, and then all those emissions happen as a result of mismanagement of manure. Then emissions created or generated in the very process of agriculture. We in Macedonia still don't have the data to say how much agriculture contributes to the pollution. However, we know that when you change the purpose of a land, let's say it's some pasture and grassland, when you transform it into arable land, there are emissions. So change of use of land brings about emissions. But luckily enough, lately forestry joined hands with agriculture, and forestry has a very good feature. It produces no emissions. So forestry absorbs the carbon from atmosphere and stores it in the wood biomass. Forestry is an emitter, though, when there are wildfires, but in principle it plays a positive role with regard to carbon dioxide. And this whole sector, under the Ministry of Environment, under the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Water Economy, it kind of neutralizes the effects. Are there ways to reduce or mitigate the impact? I will use the slogan, it is possible, and indeed it is possible for agriculture to reduce the emissions. And agriculture can become as forestry, to be a negative emitter, meaning to be absorbing carbon dioxide and GHG. So in the national documents that we've mentioned, different measures are proposed, like to manage the soil so that erosion is prevented with measures like trying to make those steep terrain green, then proper waste management, proper manure management is very much important, and there is also a series of measures there to reduce this contribution of nitrogen oxide. Then by changing the nutritional habits, we could maybe reduce the amounts of methane generated by stock breeding. And another measure is if we could add biocarbon to soil. Biocarbon lasts for a long time. It absorbs the carbon dioxide, and when infiltrated in soil, we use it as manure, and with that we'll improve the health of the soil. And there is another measure that I very much like, because I'm in favor of photovoltaics for irrigation. This measure will not only reduce GHG emissions for the amount of energy that was used previously for pumping, but it includes another component of adaptation to climate change, because the drier the weather becomes, we'll have enough energy for irrigation and to provide the essential nutrition for our population.
Грнчаровска, бидејќи оваа сесија би сакал да ја завршиме со прашањето конкретизирано до владата, односно до вас како представник од владиниот сектор денеска. Се усвои ревидираниот национален придонес кон договорот од Париз. Кои се следните чекори?
Работа. Работа и само работа.
Најлесното го завршивме, претпоставувам.
Па, најпотребното можеби.
Точно.
Можеби не толку лесно, а можеби и лесно, меѓутоа најпотребно, бидејќи без еден таков стратешки документ, не само овој, туку група на документи, не може да се води кон имплементација. Потребно е прво да се постави рамката. Тоа е пристап за секое нешто, па и за ова. На тој начин, всушност, и се прави рамката за спроведување на Европскиот Green Deal, рамката за спроведување на инвестицијската рамка за Западен Балкан. Затоа што ако државата не покаже дека знае или планира како да се развива понатаму, не е можно ниту да се добиваат поддршки за еден таков развој, во овој случај за зелен развој. Така што ние го гледаме апсолутно како бенефит. А што останува? Прво, над краток рок, до крајот на 21-ва, што е ставено и во програмата на влада Европа дома, да се стави во владина процедура законот за климатска акција, да се стави во владина процедура долгорочната стратегија за климатска акција, да се усвојат овие што претходно ги споменавме документи што не се од кај нас управувани од нашето министерство, меѓутоа имаат заеднички точки допирни. Тоа е програмата за спроведување на стратегијата за развој на енергетиката и интегрираниот план за енергија и клима. Тие се предвидени до јуни да бидат поставени на влада за усвојување. Така што до крајот на 21-ва околу стратешка и законодавна рамка, ова се приоритети. Во законот всушност ќе биде ставена институционализацијата или институционалната рамка потребна за следење на степенот на справедливоста на овој документ. Што сакам да кажам? Дека со законот ќе поставиме така наречената МРВ рамка за мониторинг, рапортирање и верификација. Одговорностите ќе бидат лоцирани. Кој, што, кога треба да рапортира која акција или кој податок, за да може после 5 години или порано, кога ќе правиме нова ревизија или ќе поднесеме нов придонес, да кажеме ова постигнавме со овој што сега го усвои владата, до ова ниво сме со спроведување, ова не достига, одиме понатаму со следното. Понатаму е потребно да се довршат студиите кои што се веќе во фаза на изработка со поддршка на UNDP. Тоа е студиите за проценка на ризиците за спроведување на овој документ. како што спомна и Дединец, со посебен осврт кон најранливите категории. Студијата, односно стратешкиот правец роудмеп за финансирање на овие предложени активности, каде што ќе се даде рамка за потребни финансии со вклучување не само на буџетски средства, туку и на приватни инвестиции, на меѓународни финансии и така натаму, да се операционализира овој усвоен документ. Сметам дека со завршување и не со завршување, него со допоставување на законодавната, стратешката и оперативната рамка и фактички ќе може да се операционализира ова што сме се само обврзале дека ќе го направиме.
И се е ова залудно ако сите ние не се вклучиме активно во она што е зацртано, а тоа е да помогнеме и како граѓани, и како стручен сектор, и како академска фела, и вие како влада, за да може да, односно делот владините институции, да ги реализираме целите кои што се зацртани со овие документи.
Се сложувам, партнерството е клучно. Ова се што зборуваше професорот, упатувам да секој од нас што го следи овој онлайн настан, да го погледне аналитичкиот документ кој што може да се најде на страницата Климатски промени МК, кој што е во кој што сите овие 63 мерки што зборуваше професор Марковска и професор Чукалиев детално се образложени. Секој да се обиде во рамките на своето действување да придонесе за нивно спроведување, затоа што таму има и мерки кои што се однесуваат и на мали, на средни предпријатија, не само за сектор земјоделство, шумарство, не само за енергетскиот сектор, туку и некои други така наречени поттикнувачки мерки или овозможувачки мерки, секој да проба да ги разбере првенствено и да ги имплементира и обратно. За сите наредни фази на идна ревизија и зголемување на евентуално на нашата амбиција, многу е потребно да знаеме што се случува на различни нивои. Таа платформа Климатски промени МК дава можност на различни засегнати страни, на граѓански сектор, на локална самоуправа, да ги реферираат своите активности, така што ние, на крајот, како аналитичари или како донесувачи на одлуки, кои ќе ги правиме своите анализи и предпоставки, како влезни податоци во моделите, да ги имаме во предвид активностите што се случуваат на локално ниво. Значи, станува збор за двонасочен процес.
Апсолутно.
Ниту владата може сама нешто да прави без разбирање, без прифаќање од пониските нивои, ниту
without understanding or accepting what is happening. Every policy has to come from the bottom up in order to be successful. As a country, we are in the middle of the process. There are policies that we need to accept. These are the EU policies. And on the other side, we have activities initiated from the citizens. So it is the role of the government to match them and come up with strategic solutions and activities. Thank you for your replies. And now we will devote some time to the media and their questions on this topic. The first question comes from TV24. How, to which extent can better detailed urban planning have an adverse effect on the environment and the life of citizens in situations when priority is not given to the public benefit but rather to the profit? Climate change is not only the melting of the icebergs and the plastic waste in the oceans, though these are indeed burning issues. However, putting into the focus the human aspect, the healthy environment, as opposed to profits, could significantly contribute towards conceptualizing a construction lot or even a city with an eye to energy efficiency. But how to achieve this if policymakers are only concerned with the utility payments for the construction lot and not with the health of the citizens? Thank you, dear colleague. Ms. Obradovic could answer this question, and maybe Mr. Dedinec could also get involved as construction plots were mentioned. I agree with the first part of the question. I do also think that there has to be correlation between the development of the cities and the climate change. This is something that is recognized at the world level. There is a platform for local involvement of the biggest cities and for green development of the cities. I wouldn't go into details about the cities because this concerns national policies, but I could add that when we set the national goals, we use data about the city of Skopje, in particular 2 studies on the city of Skopje, on the heating in the city and on the inventory. The resilient Skopje study was also taken into consideration. So it is very important to relate the local level development with the national level development. Another moment is that we as a ministry, in addition to environment and physical planning, we have activities, we have developed a methodology for integrating climate aspects in physical planning. This is also available at klimatskipromeni.mk. You can take a look at this document. So there are activities ongoing with the Agency on Physical Planning with respect to the special plan for urban planning, the master plan on urban planning, to include increased resilience and respond to climate change. So this is what we would like to incorporate into our work. Mr. Dedinec, would you have anything to add? Yes, I can hear you. With respect to this issue, I completely agree with Theodora, but I would like to add that when we are creating these policies on energy and climate, we are using different models so that we could plan long term. So the principle that we are using should be also applied in the urban planning. They should be applying different models so as to see the effect that would happen if a building of 10 or 20 or 30 floors is built. So this is the approach that should be used. We live in IT times. There are methodologies that can be applied. First, make models, see the effects, and then adopt policies. First, analysis need to be made, and then decisions. I would like to add that cities are also working on reducing local pollution and reducing GHG emissions. They pay subsidies to the citizens for buying bicycles, for different cooling or heating energy-efficient systems. So these measures would contribute towards a cleaner and healthier environment. Thank you for your reply. I would just like to add that it's interesting that the city of Skopje published a new call for subsidies for electrical trottinets and for bicycles. I think in a day the call was closed because of the high interest. The minister also mentioned that this is in correlation with resolving the traffic issues in the city. Yes, appropriate pathways need to be constructed for this as well. I missed to mention that in this first version of the law on climate action, we have addressed the issue of local actions. In the development programs and documents, the aspects of local actions need to be taken into consideration, and I hope this solution will remain in the final version. Next, we have Simona Mitrovska from MIA. According to the budgets of the municipalities, most municipalities spend about 1% of their environment budget per year. Have concrete programs been developed to act locally, and to which extent is the Macedonian government ready to act to mitigate climate change? What are the steps taken, and how big is the budget allocated for this in 2021? I suppose you will reply. How much money is allocated for climate change in 2021, and how does the government help with this? The journalist will not be satisfied with the reply. It is very difficult to quantify how much money has been spent. Why? Because this is an intersectoral issue. On one hand, there is a study. Please take a look at our website, please. We have information about received and paid funds. It is much easier to calculate the received funds because these are funds given to less developed countries for actions in this area. But with respect to budget financing, we are working on climate tracking, actually. This means that every action needs to be quantified in percentages to see what is the percentage that contributes towards a reduction or adapting to climate change. So if we would like to speak generally about climate change, we need to analyze the entire budget because there is action in the Ministry of Transport for the railway, which is also climate action. Action in the Ministry of Education on researching energy efficiency is partially climate action. My point is that this is a complex exercise. The professor can confirm this. So any quantified answer would be a non-realistic answer. The percentage varies. It can be 0, but varies up to 100%. It could be 0 because there is no such an action, but it can be 100% if the actions are described as climate change related. So the next challenge with the Ministry of Finance is to work on this, on an analysis of the budget, climate analysis of the budget. The same principle should be applied on the municipality budgets. It is said 1%, but how has this been determined that the percentage is 1 for climate action? A professor from the Faculty of Economy made an analysis showing that the budget of the city, because it has a protection program, it has a certain percentage, but this program does not necessarily cover all the necessary aspects of climate change. The climate change actions are actions often in the sector of energy or agriculture. At first sight, you cannot always detect this is a climate change action. On the other hand, the city budget may have a rehabilitation actions such as rehabilitation of pipes, etc. The next question comes from Vane Markovski from Macedonian TV. Vane Markovski, morning program Macedonia Nautro. The question for this conference is, what efforts does the Macedonian government make to implement the national climate strategy, and is it in correlation with the EU framework on climate and energy policies? I believe that this question was answered in most part previously. Maybe just summarize the reply. I would say that with the support of UNDP in 2000, when we ratified the convention, we developed the national plans on climate change. So the strategy that we mentioned is not the first document on this topic. No. We've been working on strategic documents since 2000. So we have the obligation to develop national plans called a national communication. in the climate change terminology. So these are national plans that have been done by the government. To present, there have been 3, and now we are working on the 4th national communication. It is developed according to the UN methodology. There are measures for mitigation, adaptation, research. What we are introducing now as legal solution is in compliance with the EU regulation. However, what is the challenge for us now? The challenge is to find the point of matching, of intersection with respect to the obligations. A long-term strategy and integrated plan on energy is not recognized by the law. As a non-Annex 1 country, we develop national communications and the biennial updated reports. So now the challenge is how to put these documents under one umbrella as legal solutions. And is it necessary that these documents are part of the legal solution? This is the question that we are working on before we revise the draft of the law. Now, with the support of EU, we are working on a document that is compatible with the EU framework on climate and energy up to 2030, with a long-term perspective up to 2050.
The next question from Mr. Igor Stefanovski. If we are ready, you could hear his question. Journalist from Alsat TV. My question is about soil. University studies have shown that at 16 sites in the country, soil is polluted, like in Veles, where the soil is extremely polluted, so much as to cover a radius of 14 square kilometers. The same goes for an old mine for arsenic near Lojane, and also in the location of Ohis factory, without further enumeration of polluted soils. My question is, why has one waited for so long to clean up these soils? Because we may eat vegetables grown in this soil. Professor, are you familiar with this data? Yes, these are the hotspots, environmental hotspots. These are well-known. A lot of remediation activities have taken place, like the deserted mine near Lojane, where grass was planted, trees were planted. So with much of this soil, remediation has been conducted. For a mine, it's easy. It's a relatively small piece of land. And with that remediation, you basically prevent dust and from happening, and for the environment to be safe. These hotspots exist in many places in the country where there was heavy industry, polluting industry, or storage facilities, like the storage facility for the linden in the Ohis factory, which needs to be cleaned up now. But these are small areas, small pieces of land, which are insignificant vis-a-vis the 500,000 hectares of arable land that Macedonia has. So we should not be thinking about, let's say, bringing these polluted soils back to agricultural production, because we have enough of other land, agricultural land in Macedonia that is in use. It's really not polluted. We monitor this situation, but the food that is produced in this soil, it's really not risky for the population in Macedonia. Mrs. Obradović-Grnčarovska, since some towns are mentioned with polluted soils, a few years ago there was a big publicity was given to the Lindan depository in the compound of the former Ohis factory, because it's only at 4 kilometers from the city center. Let me go back to the topic of today. This is a very interesting question. Very often we've heard this question not only about environmental hotspots, but also with regard to the climate change topic. Let me repeat that there is a lot of differences, not just common points between environmental pollution and climate change. The linden is a persistent organic polluter, POPs. It's regulated by a different convention. It's not that it's not relevant. And I'll be self-critical now. Maybe we are not spreading the word about this, so that's why people often confuse things. And I'm also a citizen of Skopje and of this country, and this question of Lindan, for example, is not relevant for the topic of climate change. It's not a GHG, it's a POPs. Next question from the colleague from Slobodan Pečat, Mrs. Mirjana Stojanovska. If the question is ready, let's hear it. Good afternoon, I'm Mimi Stojanovska from Slobodan Pečat Medium. Please answer the following question. Do you have actions envisaged, and what kind of actions is Macedonia going to take in the combat against climate change? The professor can add to that. First of all, I would mention all 63, to look at the 63 actions in the analytical paper, divided in 5 sectors, with the potential for reduction, with sources of financing as to how to reach the reduction potential, who is responsible, by when. So in the interest of time, it's really long list of 63 measures. Maybe the professor can add to this. I think, let me add to this, that not all 63 can be quantified. This is what the professor said. It's impossible to give a percentage. For example, mobility of researchers. It should be placed in a context. It's a very important aspect for climate change. Mobility of researchers is not quantified, and it's an important aspect. There are some 15 measures like that which cannot be quantified as a number, as a figure for reduction, but they are enabling for all others. As Ministry of Environment, we're trying to tap into other policies, such as the industrial policy, educational policy, the energy policy, of course, transport policy. We managed to put targets there, agriculture, the competition policy, research as a separate field, smart specializations. Maybe Natasha can mention more about it. In the strategy on smart specialization, priorities are set for the funds from EU projects, and in that regard, climate change measures together with the Green Deal measures are included in this strategy, and this was a result of the NDCs. And let's not forget the investment plan that we are elaborating together with the Ministry of Finance, so that all measures and activities in these submissions we are trying to link them with the future development as mentioned by the Minister of Finance. Since we decided to include NGOs in this panel, we'll hear from 3 different NGOs: Ekosvest, Elena Nikolovska, Collective Z, and Milieu Contact, represented by Petra Popristova. If we have them on call, let's hear their questions to the experts. Let's begin with Ekosvest, Elena Nikolovska. Good afternoon, Elena. Hello. Do you hear me? Yes, we hear you. Very well. Let's hear your question. Ekosvest would like to greet the increased ambitions in the revised NDCs. At the same time, we would like to remind you of the need to work a lot in order to implement these measures. My question is for Mrs. Grnčarovska, representative of the Ministry of Environment. What is the largest challenge in the process of development of the enhanced NDCs, and what challenges do you think the implementation will face? Another question for the MANU representative, since you are involved in the professional part of the elaboration of the NDCs. I know that all measures are equally important. If you were to select 3 measures with largest potential to mitigate climate change, what would those be? Let's start with you, Mrs. Obradović-Grnčarovska. There were 2 questions for you. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Ekosvest, who has been an active partner for years in the past in creation of generation of climate policy. About the challenges, the challenge was whether we'll be able to, whether the different sectors could understand each other. I was thinking that the economic sectors in the government will be resistant to because of the need for increased investments. However, I was very much encouraged that when certain financial flows are redirected and when certain taxes are transformed into investments in environment, in healthy environment, there is not really a big gap between what's been planned and what could be achieved. Since the proposal was in a government procedure for some 4 months, because we put it forward in December, it really gave birth to a very interesting debate and discussion. Many meetings were organized, many public hearings took place, so that everybody, analysts, politicians, could discuss the document in terms of numbers, in terms of facts. And I think for me this was the biggest challenge, and that with the adoption of this document I felt relieved and I felt that we were on the good track. What scares me, whether we'll be able to see it through. Mrs. Markovska, since you were also mentioned, the 3 measures that I think have biggest potential. First of all, I think it's high time for fossil fuels to be sent away, to be forgotten, so to say. In order for that to happen, focus should be on the renewable sources, and that's how it is foreseen in the NDCs. And also the carbon tax, increasing the price for electricity generated with fossil fuels, and it will make them economically and financially unsustainable. So renewable sources, the carbon price, and thirdly, the energy efficiency in all sectors on the consumer side. How, with less energy, to have the effect of a new energy source, and I would say also just transition or equitable transition, because if all this is going to be to the detriment of citizens, it will not be accepted. So we should start programs to help the vulnerable groups as soon as possible. The representative of the NGO Collective Z is Ena Utevska. If we have her online, I wish her welcome to the panel. And if she has a question, Ena, do you hear me? Good afternoon, yes, to your questions. Hello, I'm Ena Utevska, representative of the Association for Climate and Social Justice, Collective Z. I'm happy that we are talking about enhanced NDCs and that you included the civil society, because we are all working towards the same goal. I have three questions. First of all, when I look at the NDCs and the strategy for climate action, why in 2030 the goals are more ambitious than in 2050? Why the goals are not even more ambitious for the period in 30 years from now? Despite optimism that I can notice in this conference, the Secretary General of UN said that we are at the edge of abyss and that we are waging a suicidal war against nature. Since consumerism will be growing in a planet with limited resources, for example, the solution for big hydropower plants, it disturbs ecosystems, and or for example the natural gas infrastructure. Natural gas is also a fossil fuel, and it also destroys fertile soil. It's really not a solution for an equitable climate action. And my third question is whether you have put resources in a professional survey about a system based on degrowth, a healthier growth economy that will be in the hands of people, so to have more solar energy than hydro energy, because we have so much sunshine days. So we should create a national plan that will be guided by a real implementation rather than statistics about 1990, and you yourself said that this was not a very relevant year for comparisons. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ena Utevska. I would like to ask to make a comment, Mr. Tedinovsky. Yes, we can hear you. I would like to refer to the previous discussion. First, I would like to say that with respect to prioritization in the strategy, a methodology on prioritizing the activities and the policies was developed as part of the national NDC to climate change. And Natasha already mentioned that their criteria for prioritizing the measures, the photovoltaic power plant at Čebrene are mentioned as well. Then energy efficiency of buildings and households, and warm pumps reconstruction are measures that can contribute towards reducing GHG emissions. With respect to the questions posed by Ema Utevska, with respect to natural gas and hydropower, this has been discussed in the public discussion that for the assessment of the effects on the energy sector. Enormous increase of the capacity of the hydropower plants is not envisaged. The energy strategy and this NDC in the measure called small hydropower plants says that it is not recommended to build hydropower plants in protected areas. With respect to big hydropower plants, Čebre and Vardarska Dolina will be built as two big facilities. With respect to electricity, we need to know that Čebrene is using the same water for the production of significant electricity power. Now, when you take a look at the numbers, you see a lot of electricity, but here you need to know that Čebrene is operating, producing electricity, but below there is another power plant, and when there is excessive electricity, a pump starts that pumps the water into the lake. So we are using the same water for the production of the electricity. This should be clear. With respect to natural gas, we see it as industrial fuel. Why? Because in the industry, there are not so many options to reduce the emissions. We can introduce biomass or gas. And another option, there are three options to substitute for the coal-fired power plants. So it is necessary to introduce natural gas in the industry to reduce GHG emissions. This is one of the measures that can provide fast results short term. I agree that long term we have to think about substituting natural gas with hydrogen. These are new technologies. We have to be aware what is the technology at our disposal and how we can resolve this. With respect to to GDP, the calculations are not based to GDP only. A lot of indicators are involved: opening green jobs, reducing GHG emissions, and how much it would cost. With respect to GDP, is to what extent the needs for electricity will increase. So instead of 30 square meters, a household maybe would hit 40 or 50 square meters. This is the information used for planning. The energy consumption is not directly related to the increase of the GDP. We have projected a high increase in GDP until 2040 on one hand. On the other hand, we have anticipated a significant decrease of the electricity. This is called decoupling. Thank you for your reply. A lot of plans and actions were mentioned. Now I would like to refer to what you posed as a question as well. I don't know whether I understood the questions well. I am always for debate. If there is an opinion that a different model could provide valuable solutions, it should be analyzed, of course. So these analyses should see the light of the day. We should see them in order to be able to analyze them collectively. The Paris Agreement requires comparability of the NDCs. Otherwise, if every country reports in their own manner, according to their own methodology, it wouldn't be possible to compare them. Even now, with this methodology, it is difficult to compare them because some refer to the base year, some to the base development scenario. But this is related to the methodology for international comparison and analysis of the NDCs. This methodology is our guide, and we develop the analysis and the submissions based on this methodology. But everyone who feels that they can do or have produced another analysis, we are open for discussion. Can we implement what we have pledged? Now we're doing everything we can to support implementation with different mechanisms, but whether we can, we will see. Are the set goals, even although ambitious, realistic, possible to implement? What is important is that when you have a less efficient energy consumption, the opportunity to intervene is larger. By 2040, you will have achieved something, and at that time, the gap and the room for intervention is smaller because you have already achieved a certain level of efficiency. Why developed countries are facing a more complicated process of achievement? We believe that with the development of the technology, with the changes in the transportation sector, certain opportunities for reduction will be used, and in future the ambition will start to decrease because achievements will be made. Maybe the professor would like to add something. With respect to the issue of green growth, is this the true narrative for the development of the world? This is a narrative based on renewable energy sources, but capitalism and capital market were mentioned as well. If the EU Green Deal of course, this EU Green Deal narrative is completely incorporated into the narrative. There is a concept called degrowth at present with respect to development, to how we see the development of the world. This is a new option that poses the question of the reality of green growth as a concept, as a narrative for development. I wouldn't go into detail of this concept, but there is an equation, the Kaya identity, which shows that through green growth, the net emissions could be reduced to zero. I would like to invite Ena and everyone else interested to organize a debate at which we will in detail elaborate these narratives. It would be very interesting. We would be able to see what is possible, what is not, but the questions are legitimate. At this moment, we do not have a lot of time to go into more depth in the answers, but such a debate would be very beneficial. The measurability of the results in relation to 1990 was mentioned. This is the essence of the submissions. The essence is a robust and internationally evaluated national inventory. Our inventory reports are verified domestically and are verified by the UN. Next is the phase with the projections. What is expected in the forthcoming period based on certain incoming parameters. These premises should be scientifically based on statistical data and other documents. This is the beauty of the process, because all of this is balanced in a transparent and balanced process. So the assumptions are made on good basis. The GDP is important here. You can take a look at the submission. You will see a table there that shows the advantages and why this enhanced NDC is considered ambitious. The country in this table explains why it feels that the new set goals are more ambitious than the previous, with the previous NDC. We revised our documents, our data, our indicators, and we translated the revised knowledge into a new NDC. So every country that has new evidence that they can increase their ambition, they can do that. Today I read that US and China met. So everyone who is for a green development revises their NDCs. We have all adopted at international level the framework for climate and energy. But this does not mean that this framework will not change or could not change. On daily basis, new regulation is adopted, new knowledge is acquired. But this process is in line with the scientific achievements. So we should not dwell in old analysis with old data. On the contrary, we should dwell in the new data and information. Now, we have here the representative of Mileu Contact, Petra Popristova. Is she online? Can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes, and I hope we would be able to see you. Please, feel free to ask your question. I would like to congratulate the Ministry for the initiative and for the enhanced NDC, and also for the successful preparation of the NDC. My question is the following. Urban areas produce a significant quantity of GHG, but they also face significant effects from climate change. We speak of the urban islands, hot islands. Are there nature-based solutions in the NDC for the urban areas, such as for making cities green as mitigation measures on one hand, but also as adaptation measures on the other? The enhanced NDC is focused also on mitigation of climate change. So the aspects mentioned are very important for adaptation. In order for it to be included in the NDC, we needed to have previous analysis. Nothing special needed to be done, but as a topic, it remains to be included in the next submission, and as well as the integrating of mitigation and adaptation with nature-based solutions? The reply concretely is no, with a vision that in future it will be. We have a smart communities as a measure. If in this respect mitigation is addressed, the answer would be yes, partially, because we obliged ourselves to include the aspect of adaptation in the next submission, because we expect that by then the National Plan on Adaptation would be developed and adopted. This work should be done by the end of 2021. The ministry is not in charge of this. When we have better information, we would be able to include it. With this submission, we were supposed to follow the European. With this submission, we were supposed to follow the European ambitions, and therefore mitigation was covered in a significant part. Do we have the next speaker online? Yes. When we're making a comparison with 2030 and 2050, and we say that we are less ambitious in 2050, we need to take into consideration a number of things. There is a sector, industrial processes. In this NDC, measures were not proposed for GHG reduction in this sector. In the next submission for the next NDC, we will have additional analysis on this topic. If we exclude the sector in which we haven't proposed measures for GHG emission reduction, we can conclude that we will reduce 90% of the emissions in 2050. In 2050, we will be carbon neutral, with the exception of the sector in which we haven't proposed any measures. So when we are making comparison, we should be very careful about what is said in the document and why we should exclude a certain sector in which measures have not been proposed for GHG emission reduction. When we are making the comparison to 1990, we should be aware that we are not aware if this data is correct or not. This data was developed due to certain on the basis of certain methodology and was adopted by Eurostat, just like in the case of other countries, members of the EU and members and countries that are not members of the EU, but whose data has been approved by Eurostat. Additionally, we made a comparison with 2005 and 2014. It is important that the trend of GHG emission reduction is decreasing. We have accomplished a certain percentage, but still there is a lot of work ahead of us to implement the other measures in order to achieve the reduction and achieve the goal for 2030. Thank you for your reply. 1990 was not chosen by us as a referent year. It is a year chosen by all the countries that are working on climate change action. Okay, we move onwards. Thank you to everyone from the NGO. We have allowed for questions to be asked on the Facebook fan page. Dear Professor, would you like to add anything on these topics? No, absolutely not. What can I add? We are talking about 2050, 30 years from now. We are working using models, applying models, but these models cannot produce forecasts about what would the reality be at that time. Could have we foreseen the existence of cyber money or e-money? We cannot predict everything, or we cannot predict the technological development, which is enormous. During the discussion, different types of power plants were mentioned. Photovoltaic systems were mentioned, but the photovoltaic systems collapsed due to just one cloud. We cannot foresee what would be the energy source to be used in the time to come. The whole planet is working on this. We are contributing. Maybe our contribution as Republic of Macedonia is not significant because we are small and our fund for science research is not big, but we are trying to contribute and there will be a solution. I am optimistic there is a solution and the planet will not be destroyed due to climate change.
We allowed the chance for all citizens who would like to ask questions on the fan page of climate change on Facebook. There were many. I'll single out two in the interest of time. The first one was, what will the new NDCs contribute to, and how will citizens benefit from that? Very good question. It will contribute more nationally and regionally and globally, and the citizens, I believe, will benefit from it in a way that there will be less climate extremes. Why did I say nationally, regionally, globally? Because I already mentioned that this is also the roadmap for attracting funds, for mobilizing funds from the EU for the investments in the Western Balkans. Without a clear roadmap that you have planned for green development for the future, it's not realistic to expect that EU will give you funds. Banks are no longer financing, more and more European banks are no longer financing carbon or other fossil fuels. So this is the roadmap for a green development. I believe that maybe the benefit will not be felt immediately, because the most interesting linkages happen in the area of adaptation rather than mitigation. This is the health aspects, this is the impact on agriculture, and some other that will experience as benefits in years from now. Also, climate change and air quality go hand in hand, and the same measures contribute to better air quality. This is what they will feel: a reduction of local pollution, especially of PM, particulate matters. That's where this distinction should be made. Polluters of environment and climate change activators or climate change agents. The second question was about the frequent changes of temperature and rainfall in our country, sometimes snow in April. This shows climate extremes. Do we as a country have a strategy or plan B? What if GHGs are not reduced? We have studies on extremes. They are also available on the climate change website, not only nationally but also by regions. We have the assumptions what could be expected in terms of changes in intensity. That's typical to climate change, that intensity changes quite a lot. We have analyzed that. We know what we could expect. And so there is a role there for all the sectors that are prone to, that are subjects of negative impact, like the agriculture sector. So we can see that the climate crisis is often synonymized with other phenomena like migration, security, and so on. So this aspect of the intensity changes should be linked with the administration for hydrometeorological activities, so that they are able to alarm in order to mitigate the negative consequences. Do people who work agriculture or stock breeding, do they take it serious, the GHG emissions and so on? Do they see themselves as polluters and contributors to GHG emissions? Yes, agriculture is quite an interesting sector. It's not just a few chimneys which or factory stacks. We are talking about many agriculture producers with fragmented land. However, farmers in Macedonia are very much aware of the climate change and the effects of climate change on their crops. So our farmers now are very much climate change aware. They suffer those consequences, and they think of adaptation modes. In the world, they call it autonomous adaptation. Farmers are aware of the problems. They find and innovate ways to cope with that. We cannot impose on them anything. So there are ways in which the people in Macedonia, the farmers, are very much aware of climate change and aware of the need to reduce the emissions. However, in that regard, we'll need to do some awareness-raising activities to increase their capacities for that. But in a short period of time, the Macedonian farmers will not be just part of the problem, they will be part of the solution. We have plan A, plan B, and plan C, because we work with scenarios. Well, usually with 3 scenarios: optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic scenarios. These are 3 scenarios that we use. The realistic scenario is what we expect to happen, but we are aware, and in our documents we write the following: what if it is? worse than that? What if it is less than that? So we have those plans. Maybe they're not so visible like the other average plans, but nothing catastrophical will happen until 2000 and the year 2100. Yes, it will be bad, but not catastrophical. Thank you so much to all of you who came here in these weird circumstances, and I would like to thank all those who were online participants of this panel discussion. I hope we'll meet more often, because at the end of the day, we, the citizens, need this information in order not to be pessimistic, but to be realists, and to know that something is being done and something is happening in this field. Thank you all. This is only the first one of a series of 3 panel discussions. Our next meeting is on the 27th of April, where we'll be discussing interesting topics with different experts in different areas. So protect yourselves, take care, and at the end we'll say it is possible. Have a nice day.